Welcome to the March 21st, 2025 episode of the Energy Show. I'm energy journalist Markham Hislop, and today's working title is Danielle Smith Threatens a National Unity Crisis if Carney Doesn't Cave to Oil Industry's Demands. My guest is Professor Duane Bratt of the Mount Royal University's Political Science Department. So welcome back, Duane.
Hey, Markham. Here we go again.
Here we go again. Now, just before we came on, you were saying that it looks like Danielle Smith is holding a press conference in which she is actually saying that there is now a national unity crisis. Less than 24 hours.
Unprecedented national unity crisis.
Unprecedented, like we haven't had one,
Yeah.
like Quebec has never, doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Give us, give us just an overview of that whole the argument.
So basically, it's all about oil and gas, right? And she has a whole list of demands, which she has been fighting about since she took office, and previous governments have fought before they came office. And she had a meeting with Prime Minister Carney yesterday, provided those list of demands, put it out in a public tweet, and it's a very long list. Right. So did she congratulate Mark Carney on getting rid of the consumer carbon tax, which is one of the rarities? No, she did not. She didn't even acknowledge that that has been done. Instead, it was, don't you dare touch the industrial carbon tax, which in Alberta's case is provincially controlled. There is a threshold of where the federal backstop would kick in, but the Alberta price has been high enough that the federal backstop has not been created. So this is a provincial program, maybe something that her colleague Pierre Poilievre is unaware of. But it was also get rid of the emissions cap, get rid of clean electricity standards, build pipelines immediately, east, west, north. She didn't say south. So it was a litany of things that the oil and gas sector and Smith in particular have been calling for a long period of time. And she says, if you do not, and apparently that's what's going on today, if you do not do all of these things, then you are going to have an unprecedented national unity crisis.
Okay, so Alberta has fought with the federal government before. We've, Peter Lougheed,
Yep.
over the National Energy Program and other energy issues with Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, and then of course Ralph Klein in the 90s, and
Yep.
had all kinds of battles with the. This feels really different.
It does. I mean, you go back to the National Energy Program, Albertans even elected an out-and-out separatist to their provincial legislature because they felt that Lougheed was not standing up to Trudeau strong enough. In 2019, Jason Kenney won the election against Rachel Notley, made a whole series of promises, and then he proceeded to campaign against Justin Trudeau, not just in Alberta. He went to Manitoba, he went to Ontario, and lo and behold, Justin Trudeau wins another government. So what happened is there was a rising support for separatism in Alberta in 2019. Kenney, who is a Canadian patriot, starts to panic. So he creates this fair deal panel, appointed Preston Manning to lead it. They tour around. Many of these things are recycled ideas about an Alberta pension plan, a vote on equalization, an Alberta police force, a whole series of things. The report comes out, and Kenney really doesn't do much of it because he by that time COVID has hit, separatism has died down. He does hold a referendum on equalization. It passes pretty handily, and the government does nothing with it. Now Smith is taking that one step further. Bear in mind, when Smith won the UCP leadership in the summer of 2022, half of it was about an attack on Kenney's COVID policies. The other half was a belief that Kenney did not stand up strong enough to the federal government. And she was going to have this Sovereignty Act, which was going to annul all federal laws. And basically, it was quasi-separatism. It gets watered down when it gets passed, but that's the origins of it.
And didn't she promise to bring in an amendment to the Critical Infrastructure Act to prevent federal employees going on?
Yeah, so this was this week, right? So she hasn't. She's invoked the Sovereignty Act, but at various times she's acknowledged it's really just symbolic and it has no additional powers. But this week, she amended the Critical Infrastructure or announced plans to amend the Critical Infrastructure Act. Some of it was around border, so extending 5 miles, 5 kilometers in from the American border is now everything is critical infrastructure in that border area, but also all oil and gas facilities. And she was going to ban federal inspectors from going in those buildings. I don't know what would happen, whether they would be arrested or shot or something along those lines. And then she said private oil and gas companies cannot send emissions data to Ottawa. That will now be illegal. They have to send it to Alberta, and then Alberta will send that to Ottawa if it so desires.
A little
Both of
methodological
these are
point.
completely illegal and will not hold up.
I agree, but
Yeah.
there's a reason behind that. There's a methodological dispute between the federal government and the provincial government, because if you look at the national inventory
Yeah.
record of for emissions, they're different than the Alberta numbers. And so when
Right.
she said, remember when she said last year, "Oh, we've already reached 45% methane emissions." I had
Yeah.
three economists go over the NIR, the federal data, and it was only 33%.
Well,
And
and she cites that in the press conference that they're having to withhold the data because there's disagreements over the data. So if there's disagreements over the data, only the Alberta data can be used. It would be like if there's a disagreement between a company and a regulator, you can't use the regulator information. You have to use the company information because they're the ones who would be telling the truth.
yes, well, the craziness continues because I
Yeah.
want your opinion on something. This is the first point in her long list. I have it in front of me. It said, and I quote, guaranteeing Alberta full access to unfettered oil and gas corridors to the north, east, and west. What the hell is unfettered?
It basically means um, there is no stopping. There are no public hearings. Other provinces don't get a say. Indigenous Canadians do not get a say. The people along those corridors do not get a say. That, in a nutshell, is what she wants. That Alberta's right to produce its natural resources trumps any other province's ability to deny those resources.
And
Um,
constitutional rights.
yeah, and we do know pipelines are federal jurisdiction. And the whole battle over TMX, the federal government stepped in to do so. They did not do so on Energi East. Energi East is a much more complicated case. Whether there was a business case or not is up in arms. But
Or
conservatives are
enough oil.
absolutely, but conservatives in Alberta are absolutely convinced it was because of Trudeau and Quebec that Energies got canceled. And you cannot say anything to change their mind.
That is true because I've tried.
Yeah.
But here, we have to talk about the March 18th open letter to the political leaders that was put out by 14 oil and gas CEOs, because that is an extraordinary document. And one of the things it calls for is it wants to see the federal government declare a national energy crisis. I
Yep.
don't know where that would come from. But more importantly, it wants the government to use all available emergency powers, basically invoking the emergency
Yeah,
power.
you would have to invoke the Emergencies Act. The only
Right.
way you'd be able to do this is to invoke the Emergencies Act. These same people were absolutely critical of when Trudeau did this to deal with the Ottawa convoy. In fact, the Western Standard continues to refer to it as the War Measures Act.
Yeah.
And they keep talking about soldiers in the streets. None of that happened in 2022. Now they want the Emergencies Act to be replicated to build pipelines.
Yes, this is the thing that I mean, that is such an extraordinary, I don't know whether the word
Well,
is
they're playing off of what is going on in the United States, where all Trump has to do is declare a national emergency. that allows him to circumvent trade agreements and
Ah,
other
I see.
things like that. That's the same thing. But that doesn't work. If Carney declares or Polyev declares a national emergency for oil and gas, unless they invoke the Emergencies Act, they simply can't override Article or Section 35 of the Charter dealing with Indigenous treaty rights, for example.
Yes, that's right. And for our American viewers, in the Canadian Constitution, Section 35 says that, I forget the exact wording, but essentially major projects like pipelines and LNG plants have
Yeah, it's been interpreted as a duty to consult.
duty to consult. And in fact, when the Trans Mountain Expansion was project was taken to court, the Supreme Court said, no, you haven't consulted enough, sent the government back to do it again, and it took 9 months before it could get approved.
Yeah.
So that's what they want to do away
And
with.
they did the same thing with Northern Gateway, except neither the Harper government nor the Trudeau government decided to go back and redo the consultation. So what the oil companies and what Smith and what Polyev is suggesting, Polyev hasn't gone nearly as far, is that they would try to do the same thing and just circumvent any regulatory processes.
Now, Duane, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you wanted to create a national unity crisis, have the federal government invoke the Emergency Powers Act and try to shove pipelines down the throats of British Columbians and northern residents and folks out in Quebec. I mean, that
There
would,
is already moving political movement towards building east-west pipelines and northern pipelines. Carney is saying that. Legault is saying that. You're seeing public opinion switch. If I was Danielle Smith, I would start using a bit more honey here and start working with the other provinces and other actors instead of declaring, if you do not do this, we will leave.
yes, no,
And that's what she's saying.
this is showing up in my social media threads once in a while where Albertans are saying, okay, that's fine. Alberta will leave. We'll just go
Yeah.
join it. We'll become the 51st state.
Yeah.
Uh,
All of those Wexiteers who wanted to leave Canada, and that fluctuates between 10 and 20%. It spiked after 2019. They have now transformed to Alberta as the 51st state, except their numbers are even lower than what they were. We're talking 10%, except that 10% is inside the United Conservative Party. And so Danielle Smith has been running this gambit between playing nice with Ottawa and playing nice with Trump. In the lead up to the imposition of tariffs, she was clearly on the Trump side, right? Was never
right.
critical of Trump. In the last conversation we had, there was a split the week the tariffs came out. She wouldn't criticize Trudeau. She was disappointed in Trump. She has now reverted back to where she was prior to that, but even stronger. It was extraordinary in a press conference on Wednesday when she was asked about the Trump tariffs and said that the Trudeau Carney Liberals are a greater threat to Alberta's national security than Trump. And I was just astounded by that. And so any economist who has done these calculations, if the full effect of tariffs came in, you would see hundreds of thousands of job losses in Alberta. You would see a drop in investment, a drop in GDP. Calgary would be the largest city at risk. None of that is taking place under the last decade with Trudeau or anything with Carney. It's a completely false equivalence here.
Okay. Again, for non-Canadian viewers, Prime Minister Carney is, I think we can take this for granted, either Sunday or Monday, he is going to call the election and we'll have an April 28th or May 5th federal election. So how
Yeah.
much of this is sort of pre-election electioneering?
Oh yeah, as I said, the stuff about trying to ban the federal Department of the Environment and not providing data in violation of federal law None of that's going to hold up. But this isn't a legal strategy. This is a political strategy where, in the lead up to the campaign, Smith is trying to leverage as much as she can on Carney. And Carney is, despite some of his previous writings about action on climate and about the insurance industry and about the financial sector, on his very first day, dropped the consumer-based carbon tax to zero. He didn't change the law because Parliament wasn't in session, but I can pretty much guarantee you that if he wins this election, that will happen.
Sure.
He has made statements about, there's a bit of a misstatement here about the emissions cap. He is, but let's just say they're not as doctrinaire on this as they were. He's been much more open to pipelines. Carney is opening up much more than Trudeau did. That doesn't seem to satisfy Smith, or she feels that she can push him even further. I do wonder if this list of demands, if she has made them to Pierre Poilievre, because I don't think he could promise all of this stuff either.
Okay, so explain this to me. Yesterday, I mentioned the March 18th letter from the CEOs, and yesterday, Energy and Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson replied to that open letter, and he slapped a few faces in that letter. I mean, he came down hard on them, and anyway, so Carney, he was minister under Trudeau. Carney appoints him to, again, the same position in cabinet, even though he moved others around. And Wilkinson, I can't believe, wrote that letter without running it through the prime minister's office.
Yeah.
So what is
Yeah.
that? What signal is he sending?
Well, they're sending mixed signals, the federal government, because on the one hand, he did remove Stephen Guilbeault from the environment portfolio. And that was a major demand that Alberta and the oil sector have been making for a very long time. But Carney's not getting credit for anything that seems to be positive towards the oil and gas. It's like they're going to ignore removing Guilbeault. They're going to ignore the consumer-based carbon tax. They're ignoring his openness to pipelines, and they're going this. Like, it's a very long list of every possible irritant.
Yes, and I fully suspect that if I think the list I've got in front of me has got 9 points plus three more that she makes in the copy. Yeah. And then there are plenty of other irritants. So it is a very long list. And if she got everything on that list tomorrow, there'd be another list.
Absolutely. And this is, not only could Carney not do this, Poilievre could not do this. It would basically, everything that they have complained about Quebec, where Quebec gets this to the expense of the rest of the country, that would be this, except much, much, much more magnified. And there's no way any federal government could do this. It's impossible. You can imagine a Prime Minister Poilievre saying, we're going to throw away the Constitution on behalf of the oil and gas sector of Alberta. That's essentially what they're asking for.
I want to now go to the 35,000-foot level. I want to talk about what's happening at the global level, because all this talk about pipelines completely ignores the fact that there are major seismic shifts happening in the global energy system. There is plenty of modeling out there, like the International Energy Agency predicting global oil demand, peak oil demand in 2030.
Yeah.
And this, and I did a show last week called How OPEC Ate Danielle Smith's Brain, and basically saying that she's been captured by the OPEC model, the Saudi model, and that's the way, in fact, the entire oil industry thinks, that their oil and gas demand is going to grow significantly out to 2050. It won't peak in 2030. And that, I know, is not necessarily the view in the Liberal Party and in the government at the federal level.
It's clearly in the Alberta government.
Clearly is.
And I mean, where the oil sector ends and the Alberta government begins can be very tough sometimes.
Duane,
do you want to spend tens of billions of dollars on infrastructure that is supposed to last for decades and decades, that may be usable for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, not 50 or 60. LNG is another issue. I think they might be on firmer ground on the LNG issue. But even then, even if you removed all of the permitting process, it's still going to take time to build. And there's no way they're going to get to the East Coast. That is such a difficult process. You know, they're still going to have to go off to the West Coast.
I did the calculations the other day, and it's 3,400 kilometers from Edmonton to Montreal, and 6,130 kilometers out to St. John's in Newfoundland and Labrador. You cannot build an economic pipeline that long.
Yeah.
The tolls on it would be just uneconomic.
Yeah, and they're going to end up going to the West Coast. One is very close to being operational, and that has been a very long, arduous process. You know, so are there ways of streamlining the regulatory process? Absolutely. And there's all sorts of different ideas, but that's not what they're calling for. They're actually calling for no regulations on this,
Yeah.
on behalf of one sector of the economy.
And using the Emergency Powers Act to do it. Now,
Yeah.
here's another thing that Jonathan Wilkinson said not that long ago. I think it was maybe 2 weeks at most. But he said in a press release, he said, there is, no, sorry, it was a Globe and Mail interview. He said the economic case for a pipeline is tenuous at best. And that again seems to be, that goes against what Carney is saying. And so Wilkinson being in a Carney cabinet in that position seems incongruous to me.
Yeah, and we'll have to see how long that lasts, because you're going to see a very different cabinet after the election, right? This was a cabinet put in place for a campaign on one hand, which is why it's much leaner. And the second is, usually you're in caretaker mode for an election. That's not going to happen this time because of the pressure from the United States. And we saw that with the Ontario election, where Doug Ford was in Washington as much as he was traveling on Ontario. So in some of those key portfolios, like foreign affairs, like finance, like trade, they're going to be busy during the campaign. So I don't know. I think I understand why Wilkinson remained in cabinet, because there's only two Westerners in cabinet, and Wilkinson is one of them.
Yeah.
And he wanted, for very good reasons, to have Sajan out of cabinet. I don't know how he lasted as long as he did. But with a change in leadership, Carney obviously didn't feel the same loyalty to him, so he punted him. And then once you do that, you know, you need someone from BC. And so I would not take this cabinet as what we're going to see in May if Carney wins.
Well, this is fascinating, and this is a convoluted. It's
well,
not.
I fear that Smith is really playing with fire here, even much more so than what Jason Kenney did in 2019. And it's because in 2019, it really was about Wexit. In this case, we have an American president who has launched an economic and political war against Canada, and Smith seems to be siding once again with him. And that is very dangerous. So there is a scenario where the Liberals win government against overwhelming Alberta votes. What's going to be the reaction then? Are there going to be demands for some sort of independence referendum? What would be different is, I think, if for Carney to win, he's going to have to win some seats in Alberta. Now, there's 37 seats in Alberta. The best I can see the Liberals doing, maybe maximum, is 5 or 6 seats. That still means 28, 30 seats for the Conservatives, but that would give him at least some legitimacy here.
What do you make of the argument that Smith is doing this on the energy side because of the healthcare scandal that she's embroiled in?
She's trying to ignore the healthcare scandal as much as she can. This didn't come out of left field, right? This fight over energy has been the consistent thing.
Yeah.
What is different is her seeming to align with Trump against Canada, but she was doing that a while ago, but her language has gotten much stronger. So there's more details that have come out about the HS scandal today. It is continuing to dog the government, but no, I'm not sure that this is playing a role. I think clearly the oil and gas sector has her ear. She feels that this is a vulnerable time going into an election for maximum pressure, and but she's playing with fire with, a foreign adversary, right?
Grist for another interview.
Yeah,
Duane, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it, and I have no doubt we'll have you back during the election. It's going to be a fiery one.
yeah.
Thanks for watching the show. We are on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers and over 1 million views. If you're enjoying the content, give us a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for being part of our community.